I really do think understanding standards of command benefits everybody. My name is Mario Rueda. I've been involved in the fire service for, I think it's coming up on 37 years now. I think one of the first formal introductions was the adoption of a book in our library that was basically command procedures. It was the standards of command. And they described a process that allowed an incident commander to implement those steps along with thinking and experience and other attributes, and put together a successful response to an event.
It was meant to be done chronologically. It was meant to be able to scale up or down depending on the type of incident and the size of the incident, but something that you could refer to, especially either on the onset or maybe a third of the way into the incident, to make sure that your actions were comprehensive in nature.
What do we expect from our officers, and how does that filter down to our younger members in terms of what are standards of command, what are our standards for service, and through those standards, what's our expectation?
It's valuable for the region because it gives us an opportunity to have a common landing zone.
The standards of command, I find, are helpful in both deployment and then helping to understand, okay, here's where I'm at in that terms of incident response.
Really what it does for you is it gives you a process to go through, a roadmap to manage any incident that you may come across.
It was a new concept that had rolled out, but the training came behind the thought process, which it often does.
We've always had those standards of command on board. We talk about that with the size up, situational awareness. How do you communicate those things that we have now incorporated it into our standards of command?
The complexity and challenges of modern incidents, catastrophes of the 21st century, really call for some type of evolved organization for you to successfully get through it. The active shooter dilemma, the hazmat dilemma, the social repercussions of big incidents, the emotional stress it causes. The incidents now are incredibly complicated. A template like this is absolutely essential towards you ensuring yourself at the end of the day, and upon further evaluation, you made the best informed decision under the circumstances, and you need help. And to me, this is the answer.
The key with the standards of command is understanding how they work and when to apply them to any given situation. My name is Rick Combs. I'm a battalion chief currently assigned to LAFD Air Operations, and my current position is managing the Air Operations section here.
2 people are in critical condition. Those were the only 2 workers in the building. A third victim was outside and has minor injuries.
August 9th, 2011, at approximately 1640 hours, we responded out of quarters, out of Fire Station 98, to an explosion. When we got on scene, we came across a large 1-story commercial building that had obvious signs that an explosion had occurred. The roof was blown off. We named the incident Gladstone and assumed Gladstone IC.
Really, it begins with the first standard of command, which is the assumption of command. And whether or not that is a policy that's mandated by your department, it remains kind of a vital step that somebody assumes command of that incident. They know they're in charge, and everybody else on the scene of the incident knows that they're in charge.
Having a process to turn back to think about when the unthinkable is in front of you does help to at least provide some assurance. I do have a process here.
One of the things that worked well for us as we approached the incident, my partner Actually passed the incident at a relatively slow pace and gave me an opportunity to gain good situational awareness. And what that really did is it bought us a little bit of time. We drove down to the end of a cul-de-sac, turned around, and had a mindful discussion as to how we were going to handle this.
The next one is situational awareness. And realistically, when you get on scene of any incident and you have assumed command of that incident, your first order of business is to find out what's happening. Is it a hazmat? Is it a fire? Is it a shooting? Whatever. And I think we all can agree, if your situational awareness is not accurate, every decision you make is either going to be inappropriate or not relevant to the needs of the incident.
I remember one of the first things I asked him to do when he got to the back of the command vehicle was to write down the standards of command. And my intent was that this was going to be a significant incident. We looked at the size, scope, and complexity of the incident and decided that the standards of command were going to be 100% applicable to this incident. We were able to determine relatively quickly that we did have an explosion. There was a fire problem. We had significant damage to the building. We had a multi-casualty incident that we had to deal with, and a very high potential of a hazardous material incident as well.
And then another concept of the standard of commands, which is usually an overarching concept, the risk, developing a risk profile, because it needs to be applied frequently and throughout all phases of the incident. But we really need to validate the risk we're allowing responders to take and weigh that against the potential gain for the citizens we swear to protect. And the balancing of that is something that is really an art form, but is absolutely vital.
And at this point, we're being told by the fire department that this area is completely safe. The danger is now over from this. It was just the one explosion.
At the end of the incident, we had over a dozen assisting agencies that came together to manage the incident. But I do believe the success of the entire incident was going back to the basics, following those standards of command, and really more than anything, your commitment to use them.
Where are we putting our people? How are we providing service? And most importantly, what's our risk versus gain? If you adhere to those first 4 standards of command, you're really putting yourself on a correct path for not only for what you're doing, but for those who are going to come in and assist in that incident later on. My name is Armando Hogan. I'm an assistant chief of the Los Angeles Fire Department. I've been providing service for about 34 years, and then within the last 2 years, I promoted to assistant chief, where I'm currently assigned as the assistant bureau commander for Operations West Bureau.
Los Angeles International Airport, 9:20 a.m. local time. The FBI says Paul Anthony Ciancia, a 23-year-old white male, enters Terminal 3, pulls a rifle from a bag, and opens fire.
Yeah, that was November 1st, 2013. And I was currently assigned as a community liaison officer at the time. As I've mentioned earlier, I was a spokesperson for the fire chief. I was working an overtime day out in Battalion 10, which is out in the Van Nuys area. But what ended up happening is I received a call from our fire chief, James Featherstone, who was starting his first day as our interim fire chief. And I'm looking at the news, I see what's happening, but I'm out in Battalion 10, so I didn't know how I was going to be utilized, if I was going to be moved up. And he called me directly and said, "Hey, I need you to get out to the airport."
It was a complete panic. People were screaming, I saw children crying.
Pure and utter mayhem.
That officer who gets on scene assumes command, right? Gives Metro a size up, letting them know that they're on scene and here's what they are faced with and whatever resources they need. The second portion of that is gaining that situational awareness, where he has to co-locate with an officer, someone with law enforcement, to gather some situational awareness. And then the most important thing is the communication, not only communicating to the agency partners, but to his crew or to her crew. What do we need to accomplish? What do our objectives look like?
It's then important to develop some type of communication plan, because this stuff that you're going to communicate, you have to have a means to communicate. In the era of multi-jurisdictional, multidiscipline responses, we can all agree that if we cannot communicate with the responders on scene, it is both ineffective and unsafe.
My only question was, how would I be utilized? So I was looking at, would we need to have a rescue group supervisor? Because I didn't know what other battalions were responding. If they'd want me to just stand up Battalion 4 while they handle that incident so that we maintain coverage. So I was looking at it from that perspective. As it related to the standards of command, item 4, it talks about an incident action plan or objectives. And part of my role, as I saw it, was how can I help meet the objectives of this incident based on me coming in to provide assistance and support.
You have to also then develop incident objectives or commander's intent. You now then need to determine what you need to do to handle this incident.
It really helps everybody who's responding to the incident to start gauging big problem, little problem. Is this something we're going to be working at, or do I need to think of some alternative tactics?
We had so many different agencies there. Our biggest challenge was, how do we communicate? How do we make sure the right hand knows what the left hand is doing? And what do we do together moving forward? So we began to work on incident objectives.
It's not something you're going to hear over the radio. It's not something you're going to hear somebody say, walk through, hey, standard of command number 4, for example. You won't hear that. But what I do see is I see a laminated sheet with the standards of command on it, or the policy, that first page of the policy laminated at the back of the BC rig that they could pull out and take a look and make that connection. Or the captains have it on a little card just to help remind them. And if you could just get the first couple handled in those first critical minutes of an incident, especially as an officer, your chief officers, who you may assume are the ones that are responsible for this, don't have to undo something that did not go well.
Remember, this incident started in one area and traversed probably the length of a terminal. Can you imagine the challenges faced with those incident commanders? How do we know where our people are? How do we talk to them? How do we keep them out of harm's way? If you need a tool to keep you on task, think about those standards of command. Think about what you've done in your preparedness. And most importantly, consider your execution. And I guarantee you, you'll be able to measure your successes and your challenges equally and fairly because individuals will be on the same page.
Standards of command, I first heard about it, and it was just almost an all hazards approach to any type of incident. And what works really well for us as firefighters is if we've got something that's a process that we all understand and is laid out, it doesn't matter what comes at you on the front end. My name's Tom Clemo. I'm the current Deputy Chief of Administration for Santa Monica Fire Department. This is my 32nd year in the fire service. I've been with Santa Monica a little over 5 years, 5.5 years, and spent about the last 25 or so in Oregon or back down here in California where I got my start.
Breaking news from Santa Monica College, a 2-year community college, where there's been a shooting incident. There has been one confirmed fatality. We don't know if it's the suspect, the shooter in this case, or a victim.
Initial reports say that there was another shooting about a block and a half away from the school. 3 victims were reportedly shot and found at that location.
It was June 7th, 2013. President's in town. We had Santa Monica High School's grad night that night in town, so at 7 at night. We had a awards ceremony at the Riviera Country Club for several public safety members, so a lot of brass was headed that direction. And we had 6-month exam for probationary firefighters that same day. So I remember looking at the relief sheet, something we get emailed every morning, thinking, wow, this is a full boat that we have. And then somewhere around noon, I hear structure fire and shots fired, and immediately thought, we've got an active shooter.
Modern leaders need to see around the corner. Modern leaders really need to put their departments, our region, in a position where we're not surprised.
We had word that there were up to 70 people down in the library. So we were building a system to support the triage, treatment, and transport of 70 people. And that drove our resource order.
After the incident objectives, then we need to deploy resources to accomplish those. And again, it's a matter of determining the objectives, ordering the appropriate resources to accomplish that, and then deploying and instructing them on what you want accomplished.
Right here on the corner, the first victim was carjacked and shot and took off that direction. So as our companies came in, they saw they had a victim in a car full of bullet holes, and they saw they had a working structure fire, and made their own assessment as soon as they saw their first law enforcement car pull up that the scene was safe enough to start operating, and that's exactly what they did, and immediately went to defensive on the house. And shortly thereafter, we realized that the PD command post is now being set up at the college, and we have to pack up and we have to move. And at that point, we did just that, as hard as that can be. We put everything back together, got in the vehicles, drove directly over to the campus, and we established unified command at that location.
And we're crossing jurisdictions every day. There's not one department that's not crossing jurisdictions, if not every day, very frequently. And shame on us if we can't get our operations to be more seamless to really support the guy doing the work.
So we left Stewart in Kansas, and we got onto Pearl Street here. And the police department command post was set up just up here on our right. And this was just awash with police department vehicles from all over.
And after we have determined what resources we're going to assign to the specific objectives, the next standard of command is incident organization. And really what it does is it allows us to ensure that we have acceptable span of control, that we don't have too many entities reporting to one boss, that everybody does have a boss, and that's called the unity of command, but more importantly, that each box in that org chart underneath operations is directly aligned with an objective that it's supposed to be accomplishing.
If I don't understand what's going on with this incident, how can I manage it well? And until I get a pretty decent understanding, I'm not going to be in a position to make good decisions.
You know, I think the first and most important thing is to take that deep cleansing breath, because sometimes here, or at least during that period, information may have been sketchy.
I'll just share a quick story with you. Probationary firefighter and one of my captains asked me to count to 3 before I left the jump seat, before I got out and donned my breather. And the first time I did that, my eyes opened wide. And I was amazed at how much I could see in those 3 seconds, or that count to 3, as opposed to just getting out of the jump seat, throwing my breather on and going to work.
The information provided, and with the faith I have in our law enforcement partners that they were going to protect our folks, they were in good hands, and it put us in a good place to try to rescue some people that otherwise would not have survived.
An incident that I will always identify as probably my most significant incident and experience in incident management in my 38 and a half years of working for the Los Angeles Fire Department. Chief Deputy Emergency Operations, Joseph Castro, retired.
We had a collision with something. We had a whole bunch of people going out bleeding and on the floor.
September 12th, 2008, Chatsworth train accident. I was working an overtime day in Battalion 12, and it was about 4:30 in the afternoon, somewhere around there, and I was sitting up in the dorm, and we got dispatched to a reported train accident. And then right when I was getting ready to step into the sedan, the battalion sedan at Fire Station 98 is parked on the apparatus floor right adjacent to the kitchen. And the cook came out of the kitchen and said, "Chief, it's on TV and it's really bad." And before I stepped into the sedan, I ran into the kitchen, and there on the television was a news feed from a media airship that was directly over a catastrophic train wreck.
Every event that we respond to cannot be addressed by a standard procedure. So having a protocol that an officer can walk through to determine what needs to be done, to deploy resources, to organize around it, to reevaluate, really does provide an officer with the tools to successfully bring about a good outcome.
So from that moment, the moment of response or dispatch actually, I knew that we had a significant incident. And that's a tremendous advantage that most of us don't have when we're responding to the incident, is really being able to see around the corner prior to our arrival. At this point, I was assigned as the operations section chief, and the incident commander was moving the ICP up the hill a little bit. And really it began that first and crucial part of the standards of command, which is for me to get eyes on the incident and assess situational awareness before I could start properly developing incident objectives.
As we're following the standards of command, the IAP virtually unfolds right before you, just by virtue of writing down what you're doing and what you're hearing and what type of requests are being made to you. So again, if you follow those standards of command, your IAP really kind of writes itself.
Right here we have this playground, which would ultimately end up being the treatment area for all of the injured people. The ICP was located just up the hill, and what you can't see right now is the actual site of the accident. It's behind all these trees and the tracks.
Those tactics that are employed need to be safe tactics, and then we can start to organize around that first deployment.
It was at this point that I jumped the fence and got the initial command eyes on to this tragedy. I was assigned as the operations section chief, and again, having that pre-loaded knowledge of seeing the news footage prior to my arrival here while I was still in the fire station, and knowing that I had a big accident, I still didn't understand really the scope and complexity into this moment when I first got eyes on, and it really hit me. There were people with significant injuries. They were walking wounded. There were people that had been extracted from the trains that had just horrific trauma type injuries. And one of the important parts is that next phase, which is the evaluation and revision part of standard command. You need to establish some type of measures of success. So at some point in this evaluation and revision form, you can determine if progress has met expectations. And we did that through careful evaluation of the radio traffic and the circumstances that were confronting us.
And then everything else is the reassessment and so forth is just to rebuild upon what I've already established with my situational awareness and my communication.
The next standard of command, and the final one, is the transition of command. And that becomes very important. And that transition of command is a distinct process that needs to be adhered to. So you need to step back and you need to objectively evaluate the circumstances of the incident to allow you to determine if the strategic path that your predecessor took is indeed the correct one. There will be times when you will determine it is absolutely essential to subject your members to extreme personal risk, but those need to be limited to instances when we are actively saving lives. To have somebody die at a fire or get injured at a fire or an incident where there was no chance to save property or people is an absolute tragedy.
At the end of the day, it's not about us. It's really about supporting the guy at the end of the nozzle. And that's what I teach these guys. And it's easy to buy in that way, that this isn't about you or how your management style. This is really about that guy who's depending on you for good leadership and management.